How's it going, everybody? This is Jason Ostrowski, and welcome to another edition of the Everything Real Estate Podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about commercial real estate. And I know if you're like me, that you always wonder about commercial real estate. It's something that we may dabble in. It's something that we may come across from time to time as residential real estate agents, but we fully don't commit ourselves to get into the commercial side because, quite frankly, there's a lot that we don't know about it, and it can be a scary proposition. So today, we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk a little bit about commercial real estate with an agent from our Macungie office, Peter Adams. Peter Adams is a commercial real estate specialist. He has nearly a decade of experience in commercial real estate and has a 20-year career of business ownership in a variety of industries, including logistics, property management, hospitality, and even investment real estate. So I think you'll find this conversation interesting. If you ever wonder about commercial real estate, I think this is definitely worth a listen. So let's talk on the other side, but let's get to our interview with Peter Adams. Hi, Peter. How you doing? How's everything going today?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on this morning, Jason.
So, Peter, we talked a little bit before we got on our Zoom meeting today, about commercial real estate. And it's like the far out cousin that residential real estate agents are afraid of, right? We kind of dabble, we dip our toe in the waters with commercials sometimes, but we never fully seem to engage the commercial real estate side. And maybe that goes both ways. Maybe commercial real estates they don't fully commit to the residential side. So my first question to you is why did you choose commercial real estate? What got you into that sector of real estate?
Well, I think you prefaced it very well. I think there's, whether intentional or not, there always seems to be somewhat of a division between residential and commercial agents, especially those commercial agents who have really committed to the dark side and focus exclusively on commercial. My background is what drew me to wanting to focus exclusively on commercial. I, for about the better part of almost 20 years, owned a variety of businesses. My longest holding and my longest participation was in a logistics business where I owned a company that did convention and trade show transportation nationally. The office was based down towards Reading, but we ran that business for about 13 years with multiple offices. And in the course of doing that, we had to acquire real estate. Real estate personally has always been an interest of mine. I've always had a portfolio of rental properties and participated in other real estate investments. But when I transitioned out of the logistics business, which was my last, at that time anyway, my last business, my interest in picking up real estate as a full-time day job became much more recurring as a theme of what I was going to do next. So after taking some time away, I decided that commercial real estate really, for me, checked a lot of the important boxes. Number one being, I happen to be really passionate about business and business ownership. So because I have experience there, I felt like it gave me a leg up in talking to commercial real estate owners. Because I can commiserate about the day-to-day of running a business, the upsides and the challenges. So it really gave me, again, a good foundation to have conversations beyond just what's your desired sale rate, what's the lease rate. We could talk at a higher level. So that's the long and short of how I got here. And there have been times where I end up in a residential transaction, but it always seems to be affiliated with a broader effort commercially.
It's funny that the one thing that I always find separates commercial real estate agents from residential real estate agents, in my opinion, is that commercial real estate agents are much more logical than residential real estate agents. I mean, it's true. They look at it as a business transaction, and residential should look at it that way. But a lot of times, there are much more emotions involved, it seems like, when it comes to residential real estate agents. Is that your experience?
You said it perfectly, and I love to tease my fellow my residential realtors here in the office, because we have the luxury in commercial of being very heartless, and we don't want to hear about people's concerns over what color the powder room is. We just say, look, the numbers work or they don't, and it helps. There's definitely times where the emotion being removed allows us to negotiate more freely and be a little more aggressive when that's required. But you're 100% correct. The emotion aspect of it does get removed.
I was trying to be kind. You mentioned the word ruthless. So, that's your word and not mine.
No, I said heartless. Come on, let's be clear.
Oh, heartless. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I guess I should go for some synonyms to that then. It is interesting dealing with commercial agents. Like you said, they have a certain perspective. It's all about the numbers. And I find that a lot of commercial real estate agents are analyticals, right? In terms of their personality. Usually they're numbers driven people. So what are the 4 basic sectors of commercial real estate? We talked a little bit about it, but if you wouldn't mind for the audience, just going over what they are.
So the primary 4 sectors that we like to place properties into, it's only for ease of the analytics, but also in talking about the submarkets, because there's many submarkets. But the 4 primaries would be industrial, office, retail, and multifamily. And again, I'm always very careful to tell people those aren't perfect bucket descriptions, and there's lots of ways to carve those into finer shades of gray, but those are the 4.
Okay. And I got a referral recently. This is just an aside. I got a referral recently from a friend of mine who, you never want to say no to people that are your biggest endorsers, right? Your biggest fans. They give you leads a lot. And I got a lead recently that was someone looking for a church with 50 plus people parking. There was a lot of kind of ins and outs, and I got to tell you, not that I can't do it, but it scares me to death, and it's an interesting thing. And I feel like, I keep almost trying to tell this person that, maybe I'm not the guy that you want, but the guy's insistent that he uses me. So it gets very interesting very quickly with that kind of thing. There are so many subsectors, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, as you mentioned before, in the commercial zone. I guess what do you recommend someone who is starting out, maybe dabbling in commercial real estate? Where do you begin? Where do you dip your toe in first? What's the easiest path to get into it?
Well, I will do my best to answer your question, but I'll also tell you what I tell residential agents in our office and others that I've come across over the years. And it's not meant to sort of cast any dispersions on either my side of the fence or on residential. But when you dabble, the kind of results you can expect and for yourself and your client have to reflect that, right? If you're a focused residential realtor, you can be a rock star because you know your lane. Dabbling can be tricky. So I think generally what I tell residential agents is don't try, don't do it, don't try and get resources that would help your client, but always make your decision with your client's best interest in mind. And if that ultimately means aligning yourself with a commercial specialist in your office or in another area, then do that. And I think what I always hear back is the client ultimately respects that in an effort, again, to keep the client's interest at the forefront. Now, to your point exactly, Jason, there are clients, and it speaks highly of the relationship that a realtor has developed. They don't want to just be passed off to some quote unquote heartless commercial agent. And there's ways to accomplish that. I think it's not necessarily a day-to-day, tag team effort, but I think if the residential agent wants to stay engaged from a checking in perspective, copied on emails, involved in the process from a 10,000 foot level, I think that can work. But you're right. And to the sectors, and the church is a wonderful example because the list of things you're instantly forced to help guide them on is significant. Zoning, what's allowed from a use perspective. How do you modify the structure for a different use? I mean, just all of a sudden it opens up a whole Pandora's box of questions.
Yeah, it certainly does. And from my end, you know that you're kind of out of your wheelhouse when that little bit of panic starts to set into your stomach. Like, what am I getting myself into, right? Whereas a residential home, I'm good to go. I can do it practically in my sleep now and be prepared for anything that comes down the line. But the other thing that kind of comes up with that is the whole COVID situation. And one thing that I thought about with, the church in general is that, okay, is this the right time to potentially buy a church because of the COVID restrictions, all these things going on? Are you going to have a congregation that is going to be coming to church, right? Just from an investment standpoint, does that make sense? So, we talk about in terms of residential real estate, the COVID impact all the time. But I would think for commercial real estate, the COVID impact probably would be even greater in certain sectors that you mentioned. So can you speak to the effect that COVID-19 has had on commercial real estate during this time period?
I'd be happy to, and I will preface it with the disclaimer that all of us love to use, which is we are, unfortunately, all of us, residential or commercial, we're shrouded in the big U word, the uncertainty word. There's no perfect crystal balls, but what does, and I'll say it's interesting not to be sort of morbidly curious about it, but in a way, it almost feels that way because that we have within those sectors, and then in some peripheral businesses and other scenarios that affect those transactions, like the banking world, there's so much to consider that makes some sectors much more dangerous right now than others or more questionable as a choice. So to quickly touch on these, I'll do my best because there's so much information out there and a lot of this hopefully won't be redundant to your audience. But it varies wildly sector by sector. I'll start quickly by talking about industrial. I specifically happen to live in the Lehigh Valley, which when we go on national presentation talks and listen to a lot of the pundits talk about our nation, Lehigh Valley is a discussion point. We are such a heavily industrialized, specifically the distribution component to where we are is so large that we're on the map, which is interesting. And fortunately for us, industrial happens to be one of those sectors which so far seems to be immune from a lot of the gloom and doom projections. And it's bolstered a bit by what we all know now, which is we see Amazon at our front door how many times a week? So whether it's Amazon or the grocery delivery services, they need distribution, and which means there's a demand for warehousing. And we see that only continuing to evolve. I'm not saying it's perfect and it won't be bulletproof, but I think they're more resilient than others will be. When we move to talk about office environments, and I know realtors are very much in tune with this because we've all been forced to work from home. The office sector is going to be really interesting to watch. We hear everything from there's going to be this massive flight to working from home exclusively, which most people at a high level are not giving a lot of credibility to. The middle of the road seems to be it's just going to morph. We're going to see an evolution. But that could mean that, your previous companies that would take 20,000 square feet of office might now only need 6 or 7. But then you have to put in the same conversation. If we have to social distance, we might need a little bit more floor space because we have to be 6 feet apart. So there's push and pull in that area as well. The retail area, again, it doesn't take anyone specializing in commercial real estate to imagine what's going to happen to retail and what we already know. Whether you want to talk food service or pure big box retail, we are staring over the edge of an abyss right now, wondering how this is going to play out. We just don't know. What we are seeing for certain is a lot of, especially the malls and larger big box retailers who are either closing or these are investors who own these buildings. They're being forced to think outside the box. What's a new way potentially to use this space? So as retail changes, that could be tricky. I think the last one that I'll talk about, at least for now, and in this conversation specifically, is multifamily. And this also jumps on a few different tangents, and I'll do my best to keep it brief. But so far in April and May, And I also happen to own a property management company. And in April and May, we were very happy with the amount of rent collection that was achieved successfully. Both commercial and residential tenants were making their rent. Of course, there's exceptions, and some people unfortunately lost their jobs, which made making rent payments challenging. But as soon as that happened, what I've seen from my clients, and I know me personally, there's been an instant response to accommodate those people, to try and come up with plans to help them figure out a rent payment plan that would work for both. Reminding the tenants that this is not just a landlord problem or a tenant problem. We are, as much as I'm getting tired of the cliche, we're all in this together, but we absolutely are when it comes to the landlord-tenant relationship. So the rent collections have been positive so far. I will also mention that on the heels of that comment, we have to mention that I'm just now reading that there are some industry experts who are saying that they're wondering whether or not we're enjoying a bit of an artificial bubble. Mm-hmm. Because up to this point, there has been stimulus money being passed out to some extent, and some people have benefited from that, and they've been able to pay their rent. So as it stands today, there's no additional disbursements of federal stimulus money that have been made public. So it makes us wonder about July rent, and are we going to start to see, reality raise its ugly head a little bit?
Yeah. I always think just as a novice and my love for real estate in general, if we go back a little bit, we talked about just the brick and mortar stores, right? Particularly retail, and how those shops are going to be affected. Down my way, I think about King of Prussia Mall.
Exactly.
Just a behemoth outlet of stores indoors. I think it's now the second largest mall in the country. What's going to happen there? It's the thinking of it, and just in terms of what can happen to an entity like that, basically overnight because of COVID, is very shocking and scary. And meanwhile, you have an outdoor mall somewhere like the Philadelphia Premium Outlets, which is in Limerick, Pennsylvania. And I know there's others in Jersey. I think there's some in Delaware, which is an outdoor mall. Is that better suited to the times that we live in and going forward? Or is this, once we get a vaccine or once, something comes along that will treat potentially the virus, will people feel more comfortable going back to the way it was? And like you said, we just don't know at this point, so, are there opportunities because of COVID that have opened up? We talk about, doors closing potentially, but are there other opportunities that have opened up because of COVID and the way that it's gone?
That's a really good way to bookend some of the concern in the conversation I just mentioned. There absolutely will be opportunities, and a recurring conversation I keep having with investors that I work with and with others is everyone is very quick to say, look, you'd hate to benefit at the disadvantage of others, but there are going to be properties that just are not going to be able to survive this, and business owners that have to shutter their businesses. So there'll be opportunities, and we keep reading about, the expression is dry powder. A lot of investors have money on the sidelines, and what I'm hearing so far is that people aren't necessarily jumping in yet. They're going to wait a bit and see how this plays out to see where the best opportunities might lie. And what's also making them more convinced of that stance is banks. Banks right now commercially are really being cautious on what type of loans they're willing to commit to, and anything that seems even a little bit speculative. At least for the regional banks that I know and work with, banks are really just being very patient.
Yeah.
And the other part of it too, and you know this, Jason, where rates are right now, if you're a bank, you better be very sure you feel good about accepting a rate, sub 4 or something crazy.
Yeah.
When you can talk your clients into holding their breath a little bit, rates might tick back up, and that might be more healthy for your bank.
Yeah. It makes me think, and that gets into the investment side of things, right? You got this cheap money out there potentially, but you have banks that are a little wary about giving it out, and rightfully so. I can certainly, understand that. from an investment standpoint right now, it can be tricky, but do you feel confident personally yourself enough to invest in real estate right now? Or is it better served that you do wait on the sideline until this all pans out? Where do you see the investment market right now?
I can tell you from both a personal perspective and also with some investors that I'm working with, they are absolutely, and I am absolutely looking at deals today.
Okay.
In particular, the easier way to sleep well at night is to focus on multifamily. There's and I know a lot of residential realtors do dabble in this because it can translate well. Prior to COVID showing up, we all know the metrics had gotten so wild. People were spending crazy money. We all here in PA love to talk about whether it was the Jersey or New York money that was looking in our markets for multifamily and paying crazy multiples. It's settled down a bit, has not gone away for sure. And the one thing that we can't forget, Jason, is, and this is not something that a residential realtor necessarily would want to hear, but that some of these, depending on what level of severity you believe this pandemic will result in, there could be some percentage of smaller home ownership, which could mean there's more renters, which means multifamily becomes a shade even more attractive.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, multifamily is one area that we're still seeing lots of interest.
Yeah, I mean, I had a multifamily unit that I just sold, and we had multiple offers on the property within a few days. And it just seems like, just like a lot of residential real estate right now, it's going fast. But the majority of people that were putting in offers were going to have basically the new owner of the property live downstairs, have tenants in other places. Looking at it from an investment standpoint. And I always wonder right now, because of the market being the way it is and prices being driven up and, but the cheap money is still out there. And then you have the COVID thing going on. It's great to get your perspective on where that lies with investment properties. Because being a novice myself, I just don't know. So I think that was a great answer, and that gives our listeners some great information to consider. If someone wanted to get into commercial real estate itself, where do you recommend that the agents go first? Now, your background, it was kind of like a natural lead into commercial. And there's things that you can do out there. You can get your CCIM. You can join commercial real estate sites like LoopNet. You can join business groups. You can learn about the commercial side. If agents wanted to get started in commercial, where do you recommend that they get started?
Well, the locations that you mentioned, or the resources, whether it's CCIM or getting some specific accreditation, even at your local level with your local up here where the GLVR or your local realtor association is going to offer classes that are geared more towards commercial. I think that's a really good place to start. If someone has zero background in the commercial world or the business world, that's probably the best way to start. But then I always tell people it's not unlike residential real estate. You said earlier today, Jason, that you could probably pull off a 4-bed, 2.5-bath colonial, with your slippers on a Sunday morning without really being awake. So, but you had to learn that through trial and error, right?
Sure.
So dabbling, as much as I try and help people do that thoughtfully, you need to just put yourself in the mix with more reps, more transactions that you're either exposed to in a referral relationship or work on your own with assistance from your broker, and just become a sponge, and do everything you can to learn about zoning, use variances, all the things that are going to be part of that checklist when you get into a transaction. It can be so exciting and challenging and frustrating and unbelievably rewarding, because there can be lots of time between closings. And for a while, I was joking that it seemed like 7 out of 10 transactions failed in the 11th hour. But it's not always, it's certainly not nowhere near always that challenging. So that's how I'd suggest they probably start.
Yeah, and you have to be patient in commercial real estate. I mean, you have to be patient in real estate in general, but particularly in commercial real estate. You and I were talking before we got on today that it may be feast or famine even more in commercial real estate. You may go a long time without a transaction closing. And look, when the getting's good, it's really good in commercial, but it can be a long time in between those sales, correct?
It can be, but it's. I tell people that I work with, and I lived it when I was managing a sales force in logistics. For you and for me, it's all about keeping your funnel full. It's developing a good book of clients. And one thing that's wonderful about commercial, if you were dealing with an investor, unlike a family who needs to buy one home, I don't know what your averages are, how many, 6-7 years between purchases of a new home. If you get a couple of good investors in your Rolodex and develop some great relationships, that starts to feed itself. And that can start to, over time, minimize the time between closings with an active buyer. So there's ways to offset that, but you have to treat it like it's a job. It absolutely requires commitment and dedication every single day.
And, the last thing I want to ask you is, just out of curiosity, your territory. Because whenever I deal with commercial people, it seems like their territory is much, much wider than the regular real estate agent, residential wise. And I would anticipate that takes time to master that territory and that wide a berth that you have to give yourself to do business. You mentioned investors. Well, investors could be looking all over the place. I remember one time distinctly meeting a commercial realtor in Lower Montgomery County that says his territory is out to Harrisburg and then up to the Lehigh Valley. I don't know if you keep that kind of territory, but do you find that in commercial real estate, the territory is far and wide?
I do, absolutely. And some of that is just a factor of the number of transactions that we get to do in the course of even a year. You go where the deals are. So my license currently happens to only be in the state of Pennsylvania. So I've done work as far west as Pittsburgh and out here to the Lehigh Valley. I do have clients who I've one particularly large international client who basically gave me some parameters and said, anywhere in the U.S. is fine. So that creates a whole other set of logistics challenges and to try and choreograph that. But you're exactly right. We have to be able, and the internet and access to information is so great, of course, right now that to some degree I can be looking in Erie County as easily as I can look in Montgomery County.
Yeah.
When the rubber meets the road and you got to get feet on the ground locally, you do need to figure that out. But again, commercial is a numbers game. Mm-hmm. So if the metrics work, sometimes I have clients who don't ever want to stand in front of the building they're buying. If it works on paper, that's what they need to know.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. You mentioned Pittsburgh. I hope that one worked out for you. That would be a shame to fall through if you're heading.
That one did, yes. Thankfully, it was touch and go, but it worked out.
Yeah, I can imagine someone saying anywhere in the country, what do you know about Des Moines, Iowa? And yes. I could see that being a challenge for you. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Peter. I think you've given us a lot of perspective on commercial. Where do people best reach you? If it's okay, I'd like to throw out your information and have you be a resource for the commercial side. If that's okay with you, where can they best reach you at?
I'd love to help however I can. My email, I'm of course with Fox and Roach, Berkshire Hathaway here in Macungie. My email address is peter.adams@foxroach.com. Someone could send me a note. I'm happy to exchange cell phone numbers and we can talk further, even if it's just to commiserate a little bit or listen and hear them think out loud. However I can help, I'd be more than happy to.
Well, I may know a person that may have a church that may need some help with that. So I may be in touch with you.
Did I mention I don't do churches? Was I talk about that earlier?
Well, then I guess that I am not going to be in good shape on that one. So we'll try and work that out another way. But anyway, thank you so much, Peter. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and hopefully I'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks again, Jason.
All right, that was our interview with Peter Adams. And as you can see, commercial real estate is just a fascinating thing, right? It's kind of the cousin to residential real estate, but it is so different in terms of it being just very numbers driven, very analytical, And ultimately, it just comes down to the numbers. Sentimentality really does not come into play when it comes to commercial real estate. And so if that sounds like something that you're interested in, as Peter mentioned, maybe starting out somewhere like getting your CCIM may be a good place to start. It's always good to diversify your knowledge base and learn as much as you can. And commercial real estate certainly is one of those aspects that from time to time, if you're in this business long enough, we all come across commercial opportunities. The question is whether we take those opportunities and whether we know enough to be able to successfully handle the transaction and do what's best for our client. So anyway, with that said, hope you enjoyed that interview. We'll be back in a couple weeks with a new episode. We are trying to release new episodes every other Thursday bi-weekly. So if you have a topic you'd like me to touch upon, again, reach out to me, jason.ostrowski@foxroach.com. And please don't forget to give us a review if you get the chance. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. Let us know what you think about the show. That does it for this week. I will see you next time on the Everything Real Estate Podcast.